By the time I saw the orange vests moving around inside my barn, I already knew this day was coming. My truck was still ticking hot in the driveway as I stepped out and just stood there for a second, watching them through the open barn doors. Clipboards, measuring tapes, cell phones held up for photos. They walked past my tractors, my hay bales, my old workbench, like they were in some kind of showroom and not in the middle of my land. One of them glanced up at me, just enough to make eye contact, then went right back to scribbling on his paper. I walked closer, boots crunching on the gravel, and called out, "Morning, you boys lost?" The one with the clipboard tightened his jaw and said, without even turning around, "Sir, you can't be here right now. This is an official inspection." That made me laugh. I stepped over the threshold and into the cool shade of the barn, the familiar smell of dust, oil, and hay wrapping around me. This barn has heard every version of my life story, from the time my grandfather first rolled an old flatbed into it, to my father's tired footsteps after long harvests, to my own kids playing hide-and-seek in the hayloft. If there was one place on earth I never expected to be told I couldn't be, it was here. "An inspection?" I said, "in my barn?" Now he turned to face me, like I was the one who'd walked into the wrong place. "Yes," he said, "we're with the Homeowners Association. We're here to document ongoing violations. You'll get the report in due time." I looked past him at the other two, one snapping pictures of my old John Deere, the other measuring the width of the barn door, like it mattered to anybody who actually worked this land. "You do realize," I said slowly, "that you're standing on private property right now." "We're well aware," he said. "This structure is visible from multiple community lots and falls under the HOA's authority. Now, if you'll let us finish." I cut him off. "You know whose private property you're standing on?" He stared, irritated. "Sir, your lot number is on file with the association. I smiled, just a little. "See, that's the thing. You think I've got a lot number. You think this is one little parcel in your pretty little subdivision. And you have no idea that this barn, this hill, and half the land you drive past every morning to get to your homes is mine." He frowned, confused, and shifted his weight. The other two had gone quiet. One lowered his camera. For the first time since they walked in, they actually looked at me, like they might have misjudged the situation. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back a bit, to before the clipboards, before the letters, before these men ever set foot in my barn, to when this trouble started with one simple envelope and a whole lot of arrogance. I've lived in this valley most of my life. My grandfather came here with nothing but an old truck, a strong back, and a stubborn streak, and bought the first 50 acres when nobody wanted this place, when it was just scrub, rocks, and a narrow stream that barely deserved to be called a creek. He used to tell me that when he first drove in, the realtor laughed at him. "Why do you want that?" the man scoffed. "Too rocky to farm, too far from town, too small a creek to be worth a damn. You can't run cattle there, not proper." My grandfather just looked out across the scrubland and saw what nobody else did. Shelter in the hill, grass that would come back if you treated it right, a creek that could be widened, dammed a little, coaxed into something useful. So he bought it cheap, signed his name with hands that still had calluses from another life, and parked his truck under a cottonwood that's still standing behind the old house. He raised my father here. My father raised me here. Over the decades, pieces of land changed hands. Some folks moved away, some got old and sold off their plots. Every time someone was ready to let go of a field or a hillside, they'd knock on our door first. "Sam, you want to take this off my hands?" Sometimes it was because they trusted us. Sometimes because they knew we wouldn't subdivide it or strip it bare. Sometimes because they just wanted to know that when they drove past years later, they'd still recognize the view. If we could afford it, we did. It wasn't about building some empire. It was about keeping the valley in the hands of people who cared about it. So one lot became two, two became five, and five turned into a patchwork of fields, woods, and pasture that all had one thing in common: my last name on the deed. On paper, my name shows up on more than half the parcels in this valley. Doesn't make me rich. It just means I never left and I never stopped working. Every acre has a story. Who sold it, why they sold, what we pulled out of the soil, and what we put back. There's the North Pasture, where my dad broke his leg when a young bull decided it was tired of being herded. There's the little triangle of land by the creek, where my grandfather built a tiny shed and called it the office, just to feel fancy. There's the wooded slope on the far side of the valley, where I kissed my first girlfriend and got poison ivy in a place I'm not proud to admit. My mornings are simple. Coffee on the porch while the fog lifts off the fields. The air has that damp chill that sinks into your bones and then gives way as the first sunlight hits the grass. I listen to the birds complain about me being up so early, feel the porch boards under my boots, and let the quiet wake me up better than any caffeine ever could. Then it's the fence line. There's always a section leaning, a post that needs tamping, a wire sagging. The elk think my fences are suggestions, not boundaries, and I've stopped taking it personally. After that, it's cattle, then barn. The barn is old enough that my grandfather used to park his beat-up truck in the exact same bay where I keep mine. The boards are weathered, silver gray in the sunlight. The roof creaks when the wind hits it just right, and when it rains, it makes a sound like applause. Dust motes drift in beams of light that slip through the slats, and pigeons have carved out their little kingdom in the rafters, despite my half-hearted attempts to evict them. Every scar in that barn tells a story. The gouge in the post where my father misjudged the swing of a hay hook. The darker patch on the floor where my grandfather spilled a whole can of oil and cursed in 3 different languages. The notch in the doorframe where my oldest son carved his initials the day he was finally strong enough to lift a bale by himself. It's not pretty, not in the magazine spread sense of the word, but it's honest. And for years, nobody gave a damn what it looked like except me.
The valley was a place where you waved at your neighbor whether you liked him or not, where people minded their own business as long as you didn't let your cows trample their garden. Sure, we had our squabbles. Somebody's dog would get into someone else's chickens. Somebody's teenagers would party too loud down by the creek. But you settled those face to face, man to man, with coffee or beer or a good long argument, not with fines written in 12-point font. Then came the developer. One of the last big open pieces at the far end of the valley got sold. We all knew it was coming. Old Mrs. Kelly had been talking about moving to town for years, and when she finally decided she couldn't manage her place anymore, she put it up for sale. We hoped maybe another family would take it, someone who wanted to run a few head of cattle or plant an orchard. Instead, some corporation from out of town bought it up, the kind with a name that doesn't mean anything. Silver Rock Holdings, or Green Path Development, or some such nonsense. Within months, there were survey stakes in the ground, bright pink ribbons fluttering in the wind like warnings. Bulldozers rolled in. The first time I heard their engines echo off the hills, I felt something twist in my gut. They carved a cul-de-sac into what used to be a wildflower field, poured concrete sidewalks where deer trails used to run. Their workers moved like ants, efficient and relentless. House after house rose up, all of them looking like they've been printed off the same computer file. Gray siding, white trim, 2-car garages with decorative windows that no one would ever actually open. They put in decorative street lights, planted little ornamental trees that would take decades to offer real shade, and sodded lawns that looked too green to be real. Then they planted a brick sign at the road with a fancy logo and the words Whispering Creek Estates, a deed-restricted community, in glossy metal letters that caught the morning sun. They took the creek that had run wild behind Kelly's place and put rocks around it, lined it with a walking path, gave it a name like Tranquility Trail. I watched them from my truck one day. leaning on the steering wheel as a man in a safety vest pointed where he wanted the next little scenic bench to go. With that little sign and those matching mailboxes came something else, a brand new homeowners association. At first, I didn't care. They had their world down there, I had mine up here. I'd see their SUVs and crossover cars roll past my gate in the mornings, kids in the back seat, half asleep, coffee in the front, sometimes a bike strapped to the roof on weekends, heading out for some curated adventure. I waved. Some waved back. Most just stared at their phones or their dashboards, faces lit by screens, even as the most beautiful valley they'd ever live in slid past their windows unnoticed. Every now and then, one of them would wander a little too far while walking their dog, and I'd have to politely point out that the fence line meant something. "Sorry," they'd say, "we didn't realize." I'd nod. "No harm done. Just keep 'em this side of the sign next time, all right?" And for the most part, we lived side by side without much trouble. The first hint that trouble was coming arrived in my mailbox on a Wednesday. Wednesdays are feed days for me. I drive into town early, pick up whatever I need for the week, grain, salt blocks, the occasional extra bag of dog food if Rusty's been working hard, and then swing by the post office on my way back. Sometimes I stop and talk with folks there. Sometimes I just grab the bundle of letters and toss them on the seat. That day, I carried the mail up to the porch and dropped it on the old wooden table by the door. I sorted absent-mindedly while my coffee brewed inside. Bills, feed store circulars, a flyer for a church event, and then one envelope caught my eye. It was a white envelope with "Important Community Information" printed on the front in big, official-looking letters. Nothing else. No logo I recognize, no address I expected. Just those words and my name, spelled a little off, but close enough that the post office knew where to send it. I flipped it over, saw the return address for Whispering Creek HOA, and snorted. "Must have misdelivered it," I muttered. "Poor soul it was meant for is going to miss their important information." I tossed it onto the pile of feed store flyers and junk mail on the kitchen counter and poured myself a cup of coffee. I had fences to check, a water line to look at, and a tractor that had been making a sound I didn't like. An envelope from a place I didn't live in was pretty low on my list of priorities. If I'd known that envelope was the first warning shot, I might have opened it sooner. Or maybe not. Maybe I would have just gotten mad earlier. Hard to say. Weeks passed. The subdivision filled in. More houses, more cars, more kids on bikes. They put up a little playground that looked like it'd tip over in a strong wind, and a half-sized basketball court that sat empty more often than not. At night, the new streetlights cast a weird orange glow on the low clouds, a small artificial halo over the end of the valley. Life on my hill didn't change much. I went about my business, fixed fences, cut hay, replaced a few boards on the barn after a windstorm. Every once in a while I'd find one of their dogs chasing my cows, and I'd walk it back down the road, hand the leash to whoever answered the door, and explain, gently at first, that my pasture wasn't their dog park. Most were apologetic. A few were defensive. "It's just grass," one man said once. "It's grass my cattle eat, and grass I pay taxes on. That makes it different than the patch behind your house." He didn't have much to say after that. Then one afternoon, I found another envelope in the mailbox. This one had my name spelled correctly, my full name. And it was addressed not just to me, but to Lot 27 Whispering Creek Estates. That stopped me cold. I don't have a lot number, I thought. I have parcel numbers, sure, legal descriptions that sound like something out of an old surveyor's notebook.
But Lot 27? That belonged to somebody else. Some two-story with a white garage door and a porch swing that never seen a real storm. Still, curiosity got the better of me. Standing there in the dust by the mailbox, I tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter printed on HOA letterhead. Their logo was a little drawing of the creek with some trees that looked suspiciously taller than anything they'd planted so far. The letter started with a cheery, "Dear Homeowner," and took a hard left from there. "Dear Homeowner, this notice serves as an official warning regarding multiple violations observed on your property. Specifically, deteriorating barn structure visible from community lots, storage of non-operational agricultural equipment in view, general conditions negatively impacting property values and community appearance. You are required to address these violations within 14 days of receipt of this notice. Failure to comply may result in fines, legal action, and the placement of a lien on your property." I stood there, reading those words over and over, feeling a slow heat rise in my neck. Deteriorating barn structure. That was my barn they were talking about. The same barn that stood there before any of those houses existed, before some of their homeowners were even born, probably. Non-operational agricultural equipment. That would be my old tractor I'd been restoring, parked next to the one that ran just fine. General conditions negatively impacting property values. That was the life I'd built out of sweat and stubbornness, boiled down into a line item that offended someone's sense of suburbia. They wrote about my land like it was some neglected corner of their subdivision instead of the backbone of this valley. I finished the letter, folded it calmly, and slipped it back into the envelope. For a minute, I actually laughed, out loud, right there by the mailbox. I said, "Some clerk messed up. Plugged my address into their system by mistake. Put me down as Lot 27, when Lot 27 is probably that house with the 3 garden gnomes and the fake stone facade." I climbed into my truck with the letter on the seat beside me and drove back up to the house. I put it on the kitchen table next to the coffee pot and decided I'd go down and clear it up the next day. No point getting angry at a computer error. The next day turned into a week. There was always something more urgent. A calf came down with a cough and had to be watched. The pump at the creek started acting up. One of the old apple trees decided to drop half a limb right across the lane. Life has a way of filling itself up. But the letter sat there, a little island of white on the wood grain. Every time I walked past, I saw that letterhead with the creek logo and the words "Official Warning" itched in the back of my mind. Finally, on a rainy Tuesday when the fields were too wet to work, I decided to go have a chat with my new self-appointed overlords. The HOA office was in a little building near the entrance of the subdivision, one of those multi-purpose rooms they use for yoga classes and birthday parties. From the outside, it tried very hard to look important. Brick facade, 2 big windows, a glass door with the logo etched into it, a little sign that said "Office Hours, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Inside, it looked like what it was, a room that didn't know what it wanted to be when it grew up. Today, it had a folding table, a water cooler, some cheap coffee in a metal dispenser, and 3 people sitting behind stacks of binders and a laptop. A plastic sign on the table read, "Whispering Creek HOA Board." The woman in the middle was in her late 40s, neat hair pulled back, stiff smile, papers stacked perfectly in front of her. The nameplate said, "President, Carol Hensley." To her left was a man in a polo shirt with the subdivision logo embroidered on the chest, looking at the laptop like it might bite him. To her right was a thinner man with glasses, flipping absently through a spiral notebook, pen tapping on the table. I stepped in, shook the rain off my jacket, and nodded politely. "Good afternoon," I said. "Name's Sam Walker. I got a letter from you folks about some kind of violation, and I think we've got a mix-up." Carol gave me the kind of look you give someone who's already inconveniencing you by existing. "Do you have your lot number, Mr. Walker?" she asked, her voice smooth and practiced. "No, ma'am," I said, sitting down in one of the folding chairs opposite them. The metal creaked under me. "That's kind of my point. I don't have a lot in Whispering Creek. I've got land up on the hill, barn, pasture, all that. Been in my family longer than that sign out front's been in the ground." She glanced at the man beside her, who pulled the laptop a little closer. "What's your address?" he asked. I gave it to him. His fingers tapped, the keys making a sharp little clatter in the quiet room. He frowned at the screen, clicked a few times, then nodded to the president. "It's in our system," he said. "Lot 27. She smiled like that settled everything. "You are within the visual impact area of Whispering Creek," she said. "All visible structures and improvements fall under our architectural standards." I blinked. "Visual impact area?" "Yes," she said, sliding a binder toward me and flipping it open to a page full of legal language that probably had never been read out loud before. "According to the covenants and restrictions, any property that directly affects the aesthetic of the community is subject to review." I leaned forward and scanned the page. Dense paragraphs, long sentences, references to maps I'd never seen, lines about adjacent properties and harmonious appearance and overall visual cohesion. Half of it sounded like it had been written by a lawyer on a sugar high. The other half looked like it had been copied from a template. "Ma'am," I said, slowly, "with all due respect, that barn was there before your community was even a field for the developer to look at. I never signed anything with you. I never bought into this neighborhood. You don't just get to rope me in because you don't like looking at an old barn." Her smile thinned. She closed the binder but left her hand on it, like she was pinning the rules to the table. "We're not here to argue, Mr. Walker," she said. "We're simply enforcing the standards that keep property values high for everyone." "For your homeowners," I corrected, "not for me. My value doesn't come from your sign or your entrance landscaping." The man with the laptop cleared his throat. "Our attorney has confirmed we have jurisdiction, sir. The visual impact clause is very clear." "Has he now?" I asked. "Well, my deeds might have something to say about that." Carol stacked the binder back with the others and folded her hands, the picture of patient condescension. "You have 14 days to begin addressing the violations," she said. "After that, fines will start to accrue. If you believe there is an error, you may submit a written appeal for the board's consideration." Her tone made it clear she didn't think there was any error at all. This wasn't a conversation, it was a formality. I stood, gave them all a long, steady look, and said, "I'll check with the county. Until then, I'd appreciate you not sending your people onto my land without asking." "We're fully within our rights to conduct inspections," she replied. "We'll see about that," I said. I left without taking their coffee. It smelled burnt anyway. Driving home, rain spitting on the windshield, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. That mix of irritation and disbelief that comes when someone who doesn't know you at all decides they have authority over your life. I've dealt with banks, with tax assessors, with state inspectors and county commissioners, and more than one bureaucrat who couldn't find my road on a map if their life depended on it. But there was something special about a room full of my own neighbors acting like they'd been sworn in as nobility, convinced a few pages of covenants trumped a century of deeds. At first, I truly believed calm heads and clear paperwork would fix this. That weekend, I pulled out my files from the metal cabinet in my office. Deeds, old survey maps, tax paperwork. I set them out on the kitchen table in stacks, careful not to mix generations. My land wasn't one little rectangle stamped with Lot 27. It was a patchwork quilt. Parcel 8B, Parcel 10C, Parcel 11, and a handful of others, stitched together over decades. I had my grandfather's first deed, yellowed and fragile, describing the land in that old surveyor's way, beginning at the large oak by the creek, thence running west 630 feet to a stone marker. My father's additions were newer, but still older than the subdivision, purchased in the 70s and 80s, when this valley was still considered the boonies, and nobody could imagine wanting to live here unless you made your living off the land. I took a drive to the county records office. The clerk there, Marla, knew me by name. She'd watched me show up with my father when I was young, then watched my kids follow the same pattern. "What can we do for you today, Sam?" she asked, pushing her glasses up on her nose. "I need everything you've got on the Walker parcels, and everything on that new subdivision at the end of the valley, Whispering Creek, particularly anything that talks about boundaries." She pursed her lips. "They giving you trouble already?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. She brought out maps, thick folders, and "Something like that," I said. She brought out maps, thick folders, and a big rolled-up plat. We spread it all across a table in the back, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. There it was in black and white, the developer's purchase, a rectangular bite taken out of the valley floor, their boundaries drawn, their lots numbered, and around it, like a horseshoe, land marked with my name. I traced the lines with my finger, the subdivision, my fields, the road leading in, and then something else caught my eye. A little annotation along the road, an easement notation. I leaned closer. "Hold up," I said. "That road there, the one they all use to get home? What's that sitting on?" Marla smiled faintly. She'd seen that little realization dawn on people's faces before, in other contexts. "That?" she said. "That's your parcel, Sam. Long as I've worked here, that's been yours. The county has an easement for the road, of course, but the dirt under it is yours." I sat back, let that sink in, then let out a low whistle. So their HOA thinks they can tell me what to do with my barn while driving over my land every single day to get to theirs? "Seems that way," she said. We looked at the plat together for a while. She pointed out the exact wording of the easement: access for public road purposes, maintenance obligations, the limits of what the county could and couldn't do without my cooperation. I got certified copies of every relevant page, my deeds, the subdivision plat, the road easement, everything I thought might matter. There's something satisfying about the feel of stamped paper in your hands when you're up against people who think their printer has more authority than your history. At home, I cleared a space at the kitchen table and started writing. I wrote a letter to the HOA. Not angry, not sarcastic, polite, calm, firm. My father always said the most dangerous letters were the ones that sounded like they'd been written with a steady hand and a clear head. I addressed it to the board, referenced their violation notice by date and number, and then laid out, in plain language, the reality of the situation. I explained that my property was not and had never been part of Whispering Creek Estates, that the parcels in question had been owned by my family since long before the subdivision existed, that I had never signed any covenants, conditions, or restrictions binding my land to their association. I attached copies of my deeds, of the county plat, of the road easement. I pointed out exactly where their neatly numbered lots ended and where my land began. I enclosed a copy of the survey map that showed my barn sitting comfortably within my boundary lines, like it had for decades. I closed by saying that, in light of this information, they should immediately cease sending violation notices or attempting to assert authority over my property, and that any further entry onto my land without my permission would be treated as trespassing and handled accordingly. I reread the letter 3 times. It was the kind of thing my father would have approved of. No cussing, no threats, just facts and a promise to stand by them. Then I stuck it in an envelope, addressed it to the HOA office, and sent it certified mail. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, that some lawyer on their end would glance at the documents, mutter, "Oh," and tell them to back off. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. This one didn't bother with pleasantries. It came on the same letterhead, but the tone had shifted from cheery neighborliness to cold bureaucracy. It listed fines, actual dollar amounts, for continued non-compliance with community standards. There were line items for each violation: the barn, the equipment, the general conditions. The total at the bottom made my eyebrows go up. Not enough to bankrupt me, enough to make a point. They repeated, in slightly harsher language, that they had jurisdiction over all visible structures and improvements that affect the overall aesthetic of the community, and ended with a line about their intent to pursue all legal remedies available, including but not limited to liens and foreclosure. They talked about foreclosure like they were discussing the weather. Foreclosure on land that carried my family's name for 3 generations, on a barn my grandfather had built board by board, because someone in a cul-de-sac didn't like the look of an old roof? I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed again, but there wasn't much humor in it this time, just disbelief and a slowly hardening resolve. Right after that came the first visit. I was out by the lower pasture checking a section of fence the elk like to push through when I spotted a silver SUV crawling slowly up my drive. It was one of those shiny things you see in commercials, climbing mountains it'll never see in real life. I watched it from the corner of my eye as I worked, half expecting it to turn around. Instead, it kept coming, tires crunching on gravel, and stopped near the barn. From where I stood, I could see 2 people get out. Even at a distance, you know the type. Clipboards, safety vests that never seen a day of real danger, polished shoes sinking slightly into the dirt. One pointed at the barn, the other raised a camera and started taking pictures, angling for the worst view they could get. They walked right past my private property sign without a pause. That sign had been there so long the wood was starting to splinter around the screws, but the words were clear enough: private property, no trespassing. I guess they thought it applied to everyone but them. I'm not a man who gets angry quickly. You don't last long in ranching if every little thing sets you off. Weather messes with you, animals test you, machinery breaks at the most inconvenient times. You learn to absorb frustration, to let it wash over you and drain away. But something about seeing strangers walk around my barn with that smug, clinical attitude lit a fire in my chest. I set the fence pliers back on the post, wiped my hands on my jeans, and started back toward the house at a steady, deliberate pace. The closer I got, the more I saw. The man with the clipboard was jotting down notes like he was evaluating a used car. The woman was counting something on her fingers, probably violations, like she was tallying points in a game. By the time I reached the barn, they were peering into one of the side doors, talking in low tones about structural integrity, like they'd ever swung a hammer outside of a weekend workshop. I called out, "Can I help you?" The woman jumped a little, then tried to smooth it over with a tight smile. "We're conducting a follow-up inspection, sir." "On whose authority?" I asked, stepping closer. Whispering Creek Homeowners Association, she said with that same tone I'd heard from the president. And I notified you in writing that this property is not part of your HOA, which means you're trespassing. Sir, the man beside her said, adjusting his glasses, your property clearly impacts the view from multiple community lots. It falls within the visual impact area. We have a responsibility to— I don't care where it falls on your little chart, I said. It falls within my fences. And that means you don't set foot in my barn or anywhere else on this land without asking. Now, you two need to leave. They exchanged a look. The woman stiffened. Refusing an inspection will result in additional fines. We're just trying to ensure compliance. Lady, I said quietly, you can add all the ink to your paper you want. It doesn't change who owns this barn. For a moment, nobody said anything. The pigeons rustled in the rafters. A fly buzzed near the open door. Finally, the man cleared his throat. He said, "We've documented what we needed. We'll be in touch." "I'm sure you will," I replied. They left after a few more tense words, muttering about non-compliant behavior and refusal to cooperate as they went. I watched them drive down my road, back toward their neat little island of order. That night, I didn't sleep well. I lay awake listening to the wind whistle around the eaves and thought about just how far they might push this. Fines were one thing. Threatening a lien on land my family had held for 3 generations was another. I thought about my grandfather signing that first deed, about my father fighting with the county when they tried to reroute the creek without asking anyone who lived here what that might do, about the time a logging company tried to get rights to the wooded slope and my father politely handed them back their glossy brochure, then closed the door. We'd had plenty of people over the years try to take little bites out of this valley, some with charm, some with money, some with bulldozers. None had succeeded, not really. The land has a way of outlasting people's ambitions. But this was different. This wasn't some outsider with a big plan. This was my own neighbors. People who waved at me at the mailbox and sent their kids past my gate on Halloween, acting like they had the right to regulate the view from their front porches all the way up to my ridge. And I realized something. They weren't going to stop because I asked nicely. They weren't going to read my letter and say, "Oh, our mistake." They'd found a bit of power and they liked it. They'd built themselves a tiny kingdom and now they wanted to expand it. So I decided to treat this like any other threat to my land, calmly, methodically, without blinking. The next day, I called a lawyer. Not the kind you see on TV with flashy ads and slogans about fighting for you. A local guy named Ted, who'd handled farm sales, boundary disputes, and more than one county fight over drainage and easements for 40 years. His office smelled like old paper and coffee. Certificates on the wall, family photos on the desk, no fancy art, no marble floors, just a man who knew how to read a deed and had the patience to do it. I laid everything on his desk, the HOA letters, my deeds, the subdivision plat, the road easement, the survey. I told him the whole story, from the first misaddressed envelope to the clipboards in my barn. He read quietly for a long time, occasionally asking a question. When he finished, he sat back, steepled his fingers, and rubbed his chin the way people do when they're trying to decide whether to laugh or swear. "He's overreaching," he said finally, "way overreaching. They can enforce their covenants on the lots that signed up for them. That's fair enough. People agreed to that when they bought in. But you," he tapped my name on the deed, "you're not part of their association. That barn isn't either. If they try to place a lien on your property using just their HOA documents, we'll have fun in court." "Fun," I said dryly. "Is that what we're calling it?" He smiled. "You have something they don't." "What's that?" I asked. "The law."
and documentation and time. People like this count on being able to scare folks into compliance. Most of their power is bluff. They send scary letters, people panic, people pay. 90% of the time, nobody pushes back hard enough to test whether they can actually do what they threaten. Bluff or not, I don't like them walking around in my barn or talking about foreclosing on land their precious little maps don't even touch. Then don't just tell them to leave, he said. Make it official. Next time they set foot on your land, call the sheriff. Let the county's word carry some weight. In the meantime, I'll draft a formal notice from my office confirming what you've already told them. He tapped the survey with one finger. Also, this is good. Get this recorded with the county if you haven't already. That way, if we end up in front of a judge, I can drop this on the table and say, see here, this isn't a matter of opinion, this is a matter of record. So that's what I set up. I paid for an updated survey just to have a fresh, modern map with no wiggle room. The surveyor came out in a dusty pickup, wearing boots older than half the houses in Whispering Creek. He walked the lines, drove new stakes, checked old markers, and muttered to himself in that quiet way of men who speak more fluently to the land than to other people. We spent an afternoon together, talking about how the valley had changed. He remembered when Kelly still kept a horse. I remembered when the creek jumped its banks one spring and flooded the lower pasture. When he finished, he handed me a thick roll of paper and a digital copy. He said, "Your barn's not going anywhere, on paper or otherwise." I got his report in writing, filed it where it needed to go, and made more copies. Then I went to the sheriff's office, folder under my arm. Deputy Harris was at the front desk that day. I'd known him since he was a teenager, back when he had dated my niece for a summer and nearly died of nerves meeting my brother. "Hey, Sam, what brings you in?" he said. I set the folder on the counter. "Got a bit of HOA trouble." He winced. Those words don't usually mean anything good. I walked him through it, same as I had with the lawyer. The letters, the attempted inspections, the fines, the bit about foreclosures, the way they talked like the valley had been built around their subdivision instead of the other way around. He read through the documents, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "Yeah," he said finally, "we've had a few calls about that HOA already. Noise complaints, parking, minor stuff, nothing like this. But I'll tell you what, if they come onto your property again and you want them gone, you call us. We'll handle it. Better to have us there to keep the peace than for you to handle it yourself and have someone twist the story. Fair warning has been given. I just don't want anyone saying I surprised them. We'll put a note on file. If a call comes in from your place about HOA people, we'll know the context." Weeks went by. The valley moved through its subtle changes. The grass grew taller, then browner. The creek ran fuller, then thinner. The subdivision settled into its rhythms too. School buses, garbage trucks, lawnmowers humming on weekends. The HOA sent out its little newsletters, which sometimes drifted into my mailbox by mistake, full of articles about community pride and approved mailbox colors. The fines on paper kept stacking up, at least according to the mail. I'd get a letter every so often with bigger, bolder numbers and harsher language. They added late fees. They called my non-response willful defiance. They CC'd their lawyer on one particularly dramatic notice as if that would make the words weigh more. But they couldn't reach my bank account, and they sure couldn't walk up onto my porch and take the land from under my feet just because they wrote the word lien on a piece of paper. Their threats were big on ink and small on authority. Then came the big day. It was a Tuesday, again. Funny how trouble likes that day. Hot, but not unbearable. The kind of heat that makes the horizon wobble a little and sends the dogs seeking shade before noon. I'd been out checking the upper pasture, making sure the water troughs were clean and the salt blocks hadn't been knocked too far into the mud. As I headed back toward the house, sweat trickling down between my shoulder blades, I noticed movement on the road below.
The same silver SUV I'd seen before was rolling slowly up my road. This time it had company, a second vehicle behind it, white with the HOA logo magnetically slapped on the door. They moved like a little convoy, confidence humming in their engines. They didn't even stop at the gate this time, just drove right through like they owned the place, dust rising behind them in twin plumes. I stopped on the ridge and watched them. My phone was in my pocket, warm against my leg. I took it out, checked the time, then typed a short text to Harris. "They're back," I wrote. "At the barn this time, insisting on inspecting. You still interested?" His reply came back almost immediately. "On my way." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and started making my way down toward the barn at a steady pace. No rush, no running, just a man walking toward his own building, toward his own property, toward a situation I already knew the contours of. By the time I got there, we were back where I started this story. 2 inspectors inside my barn, one at the door, all of them moving like they were in an empty model home they were about to stage. Clipboard man, that same tight-faced fellow from before, was measuring the distance between support posts. The woman with the tape was counting rafters. The third, a younger guy this time, was taking wide-angle shots like he was planning to submit them to some kind of ugly barn contest. I stepped into the doorway and let my shadow fall long across the floor. "Morning," I said. "Looks like you forgot to check in at the front desk." Clipboard man turned, already annoyed. "Mr. Walker, we notified you of this inspection by certified mail. You received notice." "I received a stack of paper pretending you have power over my land. Notice of trespassing is what's happening right now." He huffed. "This structure is subject to review under the covenants. You have been informed multiple times. Refusing to cooperate only makes this worse for you." "You think this is as bad as it gets for me?" I asked softly. "Friend, you're standing in the only barn I've ever known, on land my grandfather bought with a hand-signed deed, and a valley where my name is on more parcels than you've got houses, and you think your little report is what I'm afraid of?" One of the others muttered, "We should just finish up and go." Clipboard shook his head. "We're within our rights. The board backed this. We're not leaving until we've completed the inspection." He turned as if to continue measuring. I let him take exactly 1 step. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket. He rolled his eyes. "If you're calling your lawyer, that's fine. They can contact our attorney. This is a waste of everyone's—" "I'm not calling my lawyer," I said. "I'm calling the sheriff." His smirk faltered. "There's no need to escalate this, Mr. Walker," he said, the first hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Too late," I said. "You did that the minute you walked into my barn without asking." The call was short. I gave my name, told them the HOA inspectors were on my property again without permission, and asked if Deputy Harris was available. The dispatcher said someone was on their way. We stood there in a strange little silence while we waited. The barn seemed extra quiet, like even the pigeons were holding their breath. The younger inspector shifted from foot to foot, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. The woman double-checked her notes like they might save her. Clipboard man tried to regain his composure by writing something down in big, deliberate strokes. I leaned against a support post, arms crossed, and looked out the open barn doors at the valley beyond. From this angle you could see the creek, the fields, the hill beyond, and, if you tilted your head just right, the tops of the roofs of Whispering Creek. All of it layered together, old and new, real and manufactured. After about 10 minutes, we heard tires crunching on gravel. A county SUV rolled up behind their vehicles. The logo on the door glinted in the sun. Deputy Harris stepped out, hat shading his eyes. He looked at the two HOA vehicles, then at me standing in the barn doorway, then at the inspectors inside. He tipped his hat at me. "Afternoon, Sam." "Afternoon." He walked over to the barn, boots thudding on the packed earth floor. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Ma'am. What's going on?" Clipboard puffed himself back up like a bird trying to look bigger after being spooked. "Officer, we're conducting an authorized inspection under the regulations of the Whispering Creek Homeowners Association. This individual is obstructing us." Harris looked at me. I shrugged. "Is that so? You boys got something that says you can be on this property?" "We have full authority over all visible structures that impact community value. Our covenants are legally binding. Our attorney has confirmed." Harris held up a hand. "I'm not asking about your covenants," he said, his voice still calm but firmer. "I'm asking about permission to be on this land. Did the owner invite you here?" "No," he said, impatient. "He's non-compliant. That's why we're here. Our bylaws state—" Harris glanced at me. "You got those papers we talked about, Sam?" "I do." I walked over to the workbench where I'd laid the folder earlier, just in case. I handed it to Harris. He opened it, flipped through the survey, the deeds, the subdivision plat. He took his time, making sure the inspector saw every page he paused on. The barn was quiet, except for the rustle of paper and the occasional creak of old wood. Then he turned back to them. "Here's the situation. This barn, this yard, and that little stretch of road you drove up on to get here, all on parcels owned by Mr. Walker here. His family's been listed as owners longer than your subdivision's been a twinkle in some developer's eye." "That's not relevant," Clipboard protested. "The community documents clearly state that any property visible from—" "The community documents," Harris said, accenting the words, "apply to the lots that signed them, the ones that chose to be part of your association. This property wasn't part of that deal. It's not in your plat, it's not in your covenants, it's not under your control, which means that when the owner tells you to leave, you leave. If you don't, you're trespassing. We have a right to document violations that affect property values," Clipboard insisted. But his voice had lost some of its authority. "We'll need your badge number. Our attorney will—" Harris smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Badge number's right here," he said, tapping it with one finger. "You're welcome to show it to your attorney. You can also show him the part of the state code that says you don't override private property rights just because you organized a committee and bought a stack of clipboards." The younger inspector looked like he wanted to sink into the dirt. The woman stared at the floor. "One more thing," Harris went on. "You know that road you came in on, the one that connects your subdivision to the county highway?" They nodded warily. "That's not your road," he said. "It's the county's easement over Mr. Walker's land. You keep antagonizing him, he's within his rights to hold you to every inch of that easement and nothing more. No signage on his side of the line without permission. No parking on the shoulder. No staging your little inspections up here. You get me?" I didn't say a word. I just watched their faces as that sank in. Clipboard's voice dropped a notch. "So what are you saying?" he asked, though he already knew. "I'm saying," Harris replied, "you pack up your cameras, walk yourselves back to your vehicles, and conduct your HOA business on HOA property. If I get called out here again because you decided to test the boundaries, the next piece of paper you'll be dealing with won't be a violation notice. It'll be a citation, possibly more than one." There was a long, tight silence. You could hear the pigeons shifting in the rafters. You could hear the faint babble of the creek outside. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. Then slowly, they started gathering their things. The man with the camera lowered it, suddenly very interested in the ground. The woman shoved her tape measure back into her bag with jerky movements. Clipboard looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "This isn't over," he muttered at me as he passed, his full bravado reduced to a single stubborn line. "Sure feels over from where I'm standing," I said, "but you do what you need to do." They walked out of the barn, their footsteps sounding much smaller than when they had come in. They climbed into their SUVs and drove away slower than they had come, dust trailing behind them like a reluctant retreat. Harris stayed a moment longer. He handed me back the folder. "You did good getting all this together," he said. "Makes it easy to shut that nonsense down." "Think they'll actually stop?" I asked. He shrugged. "Some learn quick, some need a judge to teach them, but they know now that you're not alone and you're not bluffing." "Good enough for me," I said. "You want some coffee? Got a fresh pot on in the house." "Wish I could," he said, glancing at his watch. "I've got another call to check on. Maybe next time, when I'm not on duty." "The door's always open," I said. In the weeks that followed, the tone of the letters changed. They didn't stop entirely, not at first, but the bold threats softened into requests for clarification. The all-caps "Final Notice" headers disappeared. One envelope contained a carefully worded statement acknowledging a possible discrepancy in property jurisdiction and putting my fines on hold pending review. There was no apology, of course, just a bureaucratic way of saying, "We may have stepped in it." My lawyer drafted a formal response from his office, on his letterhead this time, instead of mine. He included copies of everything he'd already seen and made it plain. Any attempt to attach my property to their association or to place a lien based on their made-up authority would be met in court with a countersuit for harassment, slander of title, and whatever else he felt like piling on. "We'll see how much they like legal fees when they're the ones paying them," he said, smiling in that way only lawyers can. Rumors slid through the valley, like they always do. News travels faster than cattle around here. I heard that an emergency HOA meeting had been called, that some homeowners were furious that their dues were being spent harassing a man whose land the association didn't even control, that some others were embarrassed that the sheriff had to be involved. People move to places with HOAs because they think it means order and safety. They don't like it when "conflict with the guy who owns the valley" gets added to the newsletter. A couple of board members quietly resigned for personal reasons. I saw one of them at the hardware store a week later. He avoided my eyes at first, then finally walked over. "Hey, Sam," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Hey," I replied. "Look, I didn't vote for that inspection thing. I said from the beginning it was a bad idea, just so you know." I shrugged. "Boards act as a group. If you're not part of it anymore, that tells me what I need to know." He nodded, relieved, and changed the subject to hay prices. The president stayed on, at least officially. Carol wasn't the type to give up a title easily, but the clipboard stopped coming up my road. The letters slowed to a trickle, then dried up altogether after one final document arrived by certified mail. It was a bland, bloodless paragraph that might not sound like much to most people. To me, it was everything. It said, "After review of county records and legal counsel, the Board of Directors acknowledges that the property known as," my legal description, "is not part of the Whispering Creek Homeowners Association and does not fall under its jurisdiction. Any prior communications implying otherwise are hereby withdrawn." No apology, no "sorry we tried to control land that wasn't ours," just a legal retreat disguised as formality. But I didn't need the sugarcoating. I had what mattered. In writing, signed, and mailed. A piece of paper putting their overreach back in its cage. A few days later, I went down to the gate at the bottom of my road with a new sign I'd made in the barn. Nothing fancy, White background, black letters, bolted to a solid cedar post. Private property, no SOA access without owner's permission. I mounted it just below my old "No Trespassing" sign. For good measure, I added a smaller one beneath it. Yes, this means you. It made me smile. That afternoon, as the school bus dropped off kids in the subdivision and cars started streaming in from work, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and watched taillights snake along the road. They drove over my land, just like always, most of them never thinking about the dirt under their tires. On their maps, they live in Whispering Creek Estates, part of a planned community with covenants and architectural standards and a board that likes to feel important. Their world is the cul-de-sac, the HOA-approved mailboxes, the trimmed lawns, the newsletters reminding them to bring in their trash cans by 9 p.m. A few weeks later, I was down at the feed store when I ran into one of my newer neighbors from the subdivision. Young couple. He worked in IT, she taught somewhere in town. They'd come by once to ask if they could take engagement photos by the creek back before all this mess, and I'd said yes. He shuffled up to me near the bags of chicken feed. "Mr. Walker?" he asked. "Sam's fine," I said. "What can I do for you?" He hesitated. "Just wanted to say, I heard about what happened. The whole HOA thing, that's crazy. I'm sorry they gave you such a hard time." "You weren't swinging the clipboard," I said. "You got nothing to apologize for." "Still," he said, "we moved out here because we liked the view, because it felt like the country, not so they could pick fights with the guy who actually lives in the country." I chuckled. "Well, that view you like is sticking around. They tried to paper over it, but the land doesn't care much about their paperwork." He smiled at that. "If you ever need us to show up at a meeting or something, just say the word. A lot of folks on our street think they've gone too far lately." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "For now, I think they've learned to keep to their side of the line." Driving home that day, feed in the back of the truck, I took the long way. Drove past the subdivision entrance slowly. Their sign was freshly washed, the flowers at the base had been replanted in some kind of seasonal color scheme. 2 kids were riding bikes in circles, laughing. A woman was checking her mail, flipping through envelopes with a bored expression. Across the road, beyond their little bubble, my fields rolled out toward the creek. The barn roof caught the light just so. A hawk circled overhead, lazy and sure of its place in the world. If there's a lesson in all this, it's not that HOAs are evil by default. Some do their job and keep folks from painting zebra stripes on their houses or parking boats on roofs. In theory, they're about neighbors agreeing on how they want their shared space to look and feel. But when a group of neighbors starts thinking their rule book lets them reach past their own fences onto land they never bought, you've got a problem. When they start believing that protecting property values is more important than respecting the people and history around them, they lose sight of what a community is supposed to be. People like that count on fear and confusion, on folks not reading what they signed or not knowing what the words on a deed really mean. They count on you throwing away your papers while they stack theirs. They count on you being too busy, too tired, or too intimidated to push back. But paper cuts both ways. If you own land, really own it, not just a little box in a subdivision, you'd better know where your lines are. Not just the lines on the ground, but the lines you won't let anybody cross. You'd better have your records handy. And if someone comes walking into your barn with a clipboard and a bad attitude, you'd better be ready to stand there, calm as sunrise, and remind them that not every inch of earth they can see belongs to their committee. Since that day, my barn has gone back to being what it's always been, a place for work, for storage, for quiet moments when the world's noise is too loud. The pigeons still roost in the rafters, my tractors still sit where I leave them, the paint on the old boards still peels a little more every summer, and I like it that way. It means time is passing, and the barn is still standing. Nobody from the HOA comes up the road anymore, not without calling first, not without a very specific reason, and never without a visible nervousness when they step out of their cars. They stick to their cul-de-sac and their newsletters and their arguments about mailbox colors and acceptable holiday decorations. Sometimes, on summer evenings, I sit on the porch and watch the lights flicker on in the subdivision one by one. From a distance, it looks almost peaceful. Kids call out, a dog barks, sprinklers hiss. For all their rules and meetings, they're just people trying to live their lives, same as me. The difference is, I know I'm a guest on this land, even if my name's on the deed. They think the land is a backdrop for their lives. I know better. Every morning when I step out on the porch and look across the fields, I remember that afternoon in the barn. The clipboards, the deputy, the moment their confidence disappeared when they realized whose land they were standing on. They thought they were inspecting a violation. They thought their bylaws and clauses and covenants gave them the right to walk anywhere their eyes could see and call it theirs to judge. They didn't know they'd walked into the middle of a valley that doesn't answer to them, and never will. I found HOA inspectors in my barn. They thought they owned a view. But I own half this valley. And now, they finally understand the difference.